everyone, and welcome to our second episode of How to Train for Aging with our amazing PhD, Kevin Morgan. He wrote a book called How to Train for Aging. He also wrote one about, I think, Kevin, it's how to
But
persevere with the crippling pain of peripheral artery disease.
yeah, how to fight the crippling pain.
How to fight the crippling pain of peripheral artery disease. Really good books. They're on Amazon. You got to check them out. He also has some new books that are coming out just in the next little bit. One of them is how to walk with your whole body. And that's what we're going to talk about right now. So, Kevin, how do you walk with your entire body?
Okay, this goes back a long way. It turns out to be important. I had rickets as an infant, and so I have weak bones and teeth. And also, as I have an aortic aneurysm, I clearly have a connective tissue weakness. Anyway, in my late 40s, I saw my youngest son complete an Ironman race in Lake Placid. And when he came through the finish loop, I kind of got interested in the whole idea, and I decided to take up Ironman training. I'd done a lot of different sports, but I'd never been a runner. And one part of an Ironman race is you have to run a marathon when you come off the bike. So I started to train for running. My son tried to coach me, and he said I ran like a loaf of bread. Aren't children wonderful? Anyway, so I managed to get through a number of issues, and I managed to pick up my pace, and then I had a knee injury. And it turned out I'd split a meniscus, and I ended up having knee surgery. So I get back into running. And about 2 years later, I have another knee injury in the other leg. And so I'm back in having knee surgery again through scopes. And so I got over that surgery, but I still wanted to do an Ironman race, so I had to run marathons. So I realized it was time to change the way I ran. So I researched it, and I came across some methods for low impact running, and also running with your whole body, which means to engage your whole system, not just to run with your legs, but to engage your whole system. And so the way I reinvented my run was I studied the running style of chi running by Danny Dreyer, and that's a very clever low impact technique. And I think he has videos online, and I put a video online about it. And I came across a book as a result of a PT recommending to me a book by Jack Heggie. It was a Feldenkrais method, but it's called Running with Your Whole Body and How to Engage Your Whole Body. And there's quite an art to it. And it turns out it's equally important for walking. And the reason I was damaging my knees is because I was heel striking. I wasn't engaging shoulder hip counter rotation. And so after 2 running induced knee injuries and reinventing my run as a shuffle, I would run with friends at the track, and they say, you can't run like that, just shuffling along. Oh, really? I said, anyway, 2 years later, running like that, I qualified for the Boston Marathon. So I guess I proved them wrong, because you have to hold a hell of a pace to qualify for that, which I did when I was 66 in Thunder Road, Charlotte. I did a 4:07:59, which reminds me of a certain politician who said he ran a sub-3 but couldn't remember his time. And all the runners are like, whatever. I mean, you remember it down to a hundredth of a second, something like that. Anyway, and I've never had a problem since with my knees. I mean, now I'm struggling with peripheral arterial disease. And it turns out that one of the 8 or 9 things in my book that are important for running and walking with peripheral arterial disease is to minimize impact. Because the impact stress is when your feet hit the ground, sends a shock wave up your legs, which is opposite to the pressure wave driving the systolic pressure wave down your legs, down towards your feet. So having a high impact style makes it much worse. Now, if I run with a regular high impact run, I'll have claudication within 25 paces, just like that. If I run low impact and I'm well trained and I'm doing all the other things you need to do for PAD, I almost never have to stop. I have to walk sometimes to get blood into my calves and feet, but the low impact is definitely a contribution. So you might say, how do you do it? Well, in order to really learn how to do it, you need to study Danny Dryer's chi running technique, and you need to work through the 30 exercises in Jack Hagee's book, which is excellent. You can get it on Amazon, but only as a paperback. And if you work your way through those exercises, it will slowly teach you how to engage your core. So when you're running and trying to get back to whole body running, one trick you can use is to run from your feet and then try running from your knees and then run from your hips and run from your shoulders. And if you have good shoulder hip counter rotation, which means when your shoulders are going this way, your hips are going the other way. And if you watch athletes running, you'll see they do exactly that. And what that causes is you land on the ground, you come in from the side of your foot and you roll down onto the foot. And you don't get the shock of impact with a landing on your heel. The problem is the shoe industry has created shoes which are basically orthotics. I don't use them. I'm now running in Nike Frees, which are basically a piece of rubber on the bottom of your feet. And those big, thick heels encourage people to heel strike, and you still get that shock wave, and you will still destroy your knees. And so mastering the art of running with your whole body, takes a load off your legs because you're sharing that load. You engage gravity more, which is the chi running approach. And I don't know, it's like you just sail along. It's just so very, very different. Highly recommended. And it's hard to describe, but it's definitely worth doing.
I do have a video of it. You want me to bring it up?
Yeah, if you have it.
Yeah, and you can actually talk over it as she's doing this.
Oh, this is Loretta?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is an old movie I made ages ago. I was in the mall and I watched the lady walking and I realized she was using her whole body. Her name was Loretta. I asked her if I could make a short video about it. Oh, this is just a cartoon I made to remind people that the way to fight injuries, athletic injuries, is really you have to use your mind. You have to think, not just do it without thinking. So here's Loretta walking along. You see her shoulders are moving. You can't see her hips, but if you watch carefully, her feet roll in from the side. She's not just landing on her heels. And so I remember seeing this and thinking, man, apart from her lateral hip rotators are a little tight, you notice her toes kind of lean out a bit. Other than that, she's pretty well 95% whole body walking. And I tell you, she was moving fast. She doesn't have peripheral arterial disease. But when I watch most people walk and run, they land on their heels. They work with their legs rather than their whole body. And the way to engage your whole body is very much shoulder hip counter rotation. So you can watch that on my YouTube channel, the Fit Old Dog YouTube channel. I also have a video on there about how to do low impact running where I demonstrate that. I filmed it with an old BlackBerry, so the quality isn't so great. So yeah, so it's as applicable to running as it is to walking. And Jack Hagee's book, if you just take the lessons in there, they're Feldenkrais based that show you how to engage everything from your core into your running. It totally changes the way you move, and it got me to Boston. And I haven't had a knee problem since. So that speaks for itself, and it definitely helps me, stay on the Ironman course with peripheral arterial disease. Was that clear?
Curious, we have some folks in our live studio audience. I'd be, want to know if anyone has any questions to get a clearer understanding, because they're the ones that are going to be, they're doing it. I see Douglas has a question. Douglas, go ahead and unmute and ask.
So Roland, so instead of like the heel strike, like you're talking about, Kevin, and then moving forward, that's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
So you're talking about landing on the side more.
You kind of roll in. Your foot if you watch her carefully on the video, you notice her foot comes in from the side. It lands on the side of her foot, and her foot rolls in and around lands flat. And the way you can test whether you're doing it right is what I call the sandpit test. It's not so easy initially, but as soon as you get good shoulder hip counter rotation, which means that as you move your left shoulder forward, your left hip goes back. And if you watch you know, really talented runners, you notice they do that like a cheetah almost, you know. As soon as you master that, when I try and show people, they almost always move their shoulder, move their hips in the same direction, which of course is not what you want. And so as soon as you can get that counter rotation going, so your hips and your hips and your shoulders are moving in opposite directions, you're engaging the spring of your spine. The spine is like a big spring, and if you twist it, it wants to spring back. As soon as you relax, I mean, as soon as you do this way, as soon as you relax, your body comes right back, right? It doesn't stay over there unless you hold it there. So if you hold it there, it will stay. If you relax, it just falls back into place. That's because your spine is like a big spring. And so you're engaging that springing motion, much like the action on a clock. It uses a spring and it has to put a very little energy in to keep the clock ticking. And that is how you run with your entire spine, your core.
Are you still pushing off with, so I understand you still push off with your toes, though, right?
If you push off with your toe, you want to roll away from your foot.
Okay.
So if you push off with your toe, you'll strain your Achilles eventually because you're putting too much strain on your calf muscles and stuff like that. And with PAD, that's a real problem because now you're loading your foot. A few things I've added with peripheral arterial disease, I now flex my feet. I flex my toes and my feet, and I engage them in my running, almost like I'm dragging myself forward. And that's helped a lot with blood flow through my feet. And that also tends, when I flex my toes, it will contract muscles in my calves, which compresses the veins in my calves and improves venous return. But you have to learn how to do that. So basically, you're kind of gripping the ground with your feet while you're using your whole body. And then that has dramatically improved my ability to keep running without having to keep stopping to let blood in my calves. You know how painful that is when you stop and the blood refills in your calves. It hurts like crap. And the other thing is, if you're in a race, the clock's still ticking and you're not moving, which I hate. I mean, you have to get over the psychology. The psychology of it is really important. People have a tendency to remember what they used to be able to do in the past. You have to let that go. You have to grieve that and move on and do what you can do now. And so, yeah, you have to watch those videos. You have to go through the exercises. Jack Hagee's book is excellent, but most people don't have the patience to work through the exercises. If you do, you get tremendous benefit. And before you know it, you're not walking or running with just your legs. You're using every piece of equipment you got, and it changes everything, but it takes a bit of work.
So is it, now I'm a little confused. So you have the one with the gripping, but how do you do the side to the front and do the gripping?
Okay, the shoulder hip counter rotation was for using my whole body, right? Developing the chi running approach, which is low impact, in which I use shoulder hip counter rotation, but I'm also using the chi running method, which is more using gravity to propel you forward with a small shuffle stride, right? Which is high cadence. Using my feet, that is the gripping with my feet, that's purely for peripheral arterial disease. I don't recommend other people do it. I mean, it's good to have your feet be alive, but for PAD, it makes a big difference to how the blood gets through my feet, because now I'm engaging these two sets of muscles on the bottom of my feet that is then pumping blood through my feet. I also have to spread my toes. So I'm spreading my toes, I'm flexing my toes and my feet, I'm running with my whole body, I'm relaxing my hips, I'm using gravity to propel me forward, and I'm thinking about all these things simultaneously while I'm running. And this is why, you know, I was third in the World Half Ironman Championships in my age group in Finland. It's because of doing all this stuff. It was still a nightmare to finish because it was a hilly course. But if I wasn't doing all those things, my feet and my calves would have stopped me dead. So for a lot of people, this might sound like too much, but initially you just take one thing and apply it. And I say the first place to start is shoulder hip counter rotation. I mean, it's very easy, really. You're moving your hips back, you're moving your shoulders forward. So they're just rotating in an opposite direction. It's no big deal. And so once you master that, that would change the impact stresses enormously. The next thing I would do is yoga toes. This is for PAD. Spread those feet. You've got to spread those metatarsals and not compress the vessels that run down between those bones. That makes a difference. I've had a couple of people who contacted me and said it did help. And then the flexing of the toes and feet, that's to improve venous return and to improve the flow of fluids through your feet. So you take these things on one at a time, and then you slowly incorporate them into how you move. But you have to become body aware, and you have to care enough to think about it. But the individual components aren't that complex. I mean, shoulder hip counter rotation, and what's so complicated about that? It's not. And initially learning it can be confusing because people have a tendency to do this, right? With their shoulders and their hips, they bring them together. That doesn't use the spine. The spinal spring is really powerful. So these are a lot of things to try and explain in a video. And so you got to think about it, how you move your hips in the opposite direction. And that is the thing people find difficult at first. Now I can't imagine moving any other way.
You know, it's interesting because at first when I was just standing there and I was just talking to you, I was like, how in the world, what is he talking about? Moving hips, back, shoulder forward, but it's actually, is it left hip back? I mean, right hip back, left shoulder forward.
No, right hip back, right shoulder forward. So your hips are moving in the opposite direction.
Right. So
your hips and your shoulders are doing this.
Right, but which shoulder? So it's the right hip, right
Right,
shoulder.
For the right shoulder forward, my hip goes back. For the left shoulder forward, my left hip goes back. So it's always moving in the opposite direction. So when I move my left shoulder forward, my left hip goes back and my pelvis rotates in the opposite direction. Man, I've shown this to so many people, and some of them almost never get it. You get that, you've already got probably 50% of the benefit of what I'm talking about. It's so funny watching you people do this. I was trying to show this to so many people, and when they get it, they're like, "Oh, now I see." See, you want to propel your body forward with your right leg. Okay, let's imagine you want to propel your body forward your right leg. So you're going to push back with your hip, but you want to reach forward with your right shoulder because you're like moving in opposite direction. You're now lengthening your entire body and lengthening your stride. But what you're really doing is engaging your spine.
But it's more like, so if the right hip's back, my leg is back as I'm walking. So
if your right shoulder goes forward, your right hip goes back.
Right, because my leg goes back. My right leg goes back.
That goes back because it's carried back by your hip.
Right. So I think the easiest way for other people, because this is the way I'm thinking right now. So your right arm goes forward. Bring that right arm forward with the shoulder, right? Your right leg is back at that time.
Yeah, because you're now reaching as far as you can. You're lengthening your body essentially.
Exactly. Okay, now I get it. So I think it was confusing. Now I see Douglas got it, and I think Heinz got it as well. Right? It's bring that arm, the right arm forward, but your right leg is behind you. So you're stepping forward with your left leg.
Yes.
I got it. I got it.
And once you engage that into normal walking, it becomes completely automatic. And that is a big change of minimizing heel striking. But you're also starting to engage the spring of your spine, which is a real spring, and it will store that energy on each stroke of your legs, right? Anyway, okay, that's that. But doing this with your whole body, you have to spend it's worth a little investing a little time. People don't want to spend their time thinking about it. They just want to walk the way they learned. And when did they learn to walk? They learned to walk when they were about 18 months old, and they walked like that for the rest of their life. So that isn't an optimal way to learn a complex skill. I mean, it's like sticking your food in your ear. Come on.
So that's funny. So if you're walking with your whole body, you can still curl your toes to grip with your toes as you're walking.
Well, you have to add that on. And that gripping with your toes is tricky at first. First, you just want to gently stroke the ground. That's all. If you do it too much, you'll wear you'll wear all the muscles out down here. So you just gently get used to stroking the ground gently with your toes. Eventually, you engage your whole foot, right? And when you do that, it contracts these muscles in your calf that pumps the blood back towards your heart, which it could because it compresses the veins in your calves. So it does help venous return. And so that's pretty important. And one thing I found helpful when it comes to flexing my toes, because I'm going to flex my toes gently on the power stroke of my leg, and then I lift my foot up. I don't push off my toe. I lift my foot up, and now the other foot's doing its job, okay? And so I know this sounds complicated, but it really is complicated.
But it really is, right?
It's worth the effort.
Complicated, and it is complicated.
Remember, while you're doing that, you're spreading your toes.
Okay.
Because you want to. Yes, so you need a big toe box in your shoe.
Okay, so you can still do it if you're in a wide toe box, shoe, right?
Oh, you need a wide toe box so she can spread. You don't wear tube socks, whatever you do, because they'll compress your feet. And I use it for running and walking. And these are all the things I've incorporated into getting around. And now I can walk for a long way without my calves locking up. It used to be that I could only walk a few hundred yards and my calf would lock up and I'd have to stop, wait for the blood, come back in my calf, go through the pain of that, then start walking again. So back in, I guess, 2015, that's the state I was in that I describe in my first book, How to Train for Aging. But now I've managed to work out all these different additions, which are in the PhD book, and you slowly, one by one, incorporate them into the way you move, whether it's walking or running. Another thing I've noticed, which people won't want to hear, is if I back off on the running, it makes my walking worse. The running really does cause collaterals to grow. And in order to grow collaterals, you have to suffer discomfort. You have to suffer some pain, because your body needs to know you've got a problem and it needs to, get with the program and grow some collaterals. Also, if you don't exercise by, pretty energetic walking or running, those collaterals will soon start to close up, and you don't want that. So I found in races, my collaterals don't open fully until about 5 miles into the run, which means the first 5 miles are pretty hellish. But I get there and then I manage to do it. So it's a matter, to some degree, of pain control and accepting the facts that you have to work. It's just, but spreading your toes isn't a complicated idea. Engaging toe flexion isn't a complicated idea. Using hip shoulder counter rotation isn't a complicated idea. And relaxing your hips isn't complicated. Incorporating gravity isn't complicated. I mean, none of these things are complicated until you do them all at once.
But if you do things one at a time and you just start somewhere, we're starting with, right arm, right shoulder forward, right hip back, and, you're twisting to get, start your steps. And then you're going to try, because, for people with PAD, you want to widen that toe box, get that wide toe box, spread your toes. And then if you need to, grip with your toe.
Yeah, gently, everything gentle.
Just gentle. Okay. So you don't want to cause a cramp because you're tightening them.
You need to train those muscles first, and they get stronger. They get a lot stronger. Think about when you learn to drive. When you learn to drive, everything was confusing, especially if you learn with the manual shift, which I did. And I had to double declutch the clutch, if anybody here even knows what that means, because there was no synchro mesh in the car. So to change gear, you had to disengage the engine with the clutch, right? And then you change the gear and you tap the clutch slightly to bring the gears up to the speed of the car. Then you separate and then you put it in. So you actually use the clutch twice while you were manual shifting. Well, that took a while. Well, now it's easy with automatic cars, but you still have to learn how to steer the car. And kids, when they start learning, first they kind of oversteer and they don't let the car go where it wants to go according to how it's turning or whatever. Well, all these things in a car, watching the traffic, watching the road signs, all these things come in one at a time, and eventually you're driving, you're not even thinking about it. It's the same with what I'm describing for what I call whole body peripheral arterial disease running. It's the same idea. You take all these things and you incorporate them one after another. And as an N of one, I'm showing it can be done. I didn't say it's easy, but it can be done.
Can I ask another one? So,
well, you already did. That's a joke, by the way.
Okay. So with that walking style, will that change your stride? Because I was taught to make a little bit longer stride, so I'm thinking that should shorten my stride, shouldn't it?
Shorter stride is better.
Okay.
But first of all, it'll seem kind of slow until gradually you'll pick up the cadence, the number of strokes per minute, and then you'll get back to the same speed. It's just if you start by learning the shoulder hip counter rotation and shortening your stride and taking your time, eventually it becomes automatic.
Speed walking is what I was.
Speed walking is a whole nother game. The way that people walk is really weird.
I know.
Yeah, and that's a long stride, and it is whole body though.
Awesome. Well, I think we have a lot of food for thought on this one, Kevin. I think that that's really awesome. I think that everyone should practice. And when do you think we should? I think we should reconvene on this one again and revisit. Let everyone try it and then come back and we can have a conversation about it again. I think it might be worth just revisiting again in case people have questions after they try it. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree because you got to remember, I had my problem started in 2015. I studied this for 7 years before I managed to work all these things out. I mean, I started with reducing impact as best I could, and I was already using low impact, and I noticed that helped, but I was still having to stop. And then I started thinking about venous return and started contracting my toes, and I found that helped. And it was like one thing after another, I slowly incorporated bit by bit because I had no driving instructor. I was working it out for myself. So it took me 7 years to work it all out. So yeah, I think people should try it and come back and tell me how it went. And hopefully not too many of them are being leg casts and stuff.
We have the disclaimer up here. Remember the advice and views offered here are that of Dr. Kevin Morgan, PhD and veterinarian extraordinaire, PhD warrior, Ironman triathlete, world Ironman.
I'll tell you, by the way, Kim.
Talk with your own doctor before following any of his advice. Make sure you get their explicit consent.
Not that the doctors know anything about what we're talking about, but the most important qualification now is my fellowship with the Royal College of Pathologists in England, which is a medical society, and they accepted me as a member, as a fellow based on published works. And that is a society the most MDs are aware of. PhD, they just think, you've got a biochemistry degree or something. And so anyway, that's just something worth knowing. I use those letters sometimes when I'm having to argue with, such people as cardiologists, but I won't say any more about that.
I would love to be a fly on the wall in your cardiology appointment and also your vascular appointment.
Yeah.
So Douglas also had one more thing he wanted to tell you. He actually followed some of your advice on socks and wanted
I have to tell you, Kevin, I do not own. I'm on my last pair of tube socks that I own now. I have literally changed every sock I have to smart socks. And
Smart wool.
Yeah.
And yeah, they're really good.
And I hate to say that, I don't know how to say it other than it sounds stupid, but I literally can tell a difference in how my feet feel when I get through walking now. I don't know how to explain that, but I've changed. That's all I wear now, basically.
The smart wool socks.
Yes.
Yeah, I use those in hiking boots, but I wear no socks at all in running shoes. That's good. I'm glad you like them. Smart wool is really good, and wool is good for your feet. Cotton is not good for your skin.
But we also been told by foot doctors that we should wear socks all the time to prevent getting injuries or stuff like that. And I think doesn't that depend on Kim can probably answer this one too.
I mean, we have diabetics, people that have neuropathy on their and have a very high risk of any calluses, tears, things like that. And so the podiatrists do suggest that anyone who has neuropathy in their feet or diabetes meet with them, try and figure out some way to protect their feet. They do suggest wearing socks as an extra barrier, just to protect from any sort of blisters.
I can comment on that. It depends how they use their feet. If they are engaging their feet and using their feet appropriately, socks probably aren't necessary. I dumped socks for running and walking without hiking boots because I had corns on my right foot, which is the one that has the greatest mechanical difficulty due to blood flow. And getting rid of the socks got rid of the corns. I couldn't get rid of them. So once you start flexing your feet, using your whole body, you start engaging your feet. And instead of your feet thumping along the ground, they're having a conversation with the ground. And so I understand their concern about fragile skin and injuries and stuff like that. But actually, socks can do more harm than good. It's all a matter of how you use your feet, which is extremely rarely explained to anybody by any medical person I've ever met. And so the fact your feet are having a conversation with the ground, not just clomping along, is an extremely important point. And if you're in the modern running shoes, they're like orthotics. They give you almost no way you can even use your feet. And that's why I use a minimalist shoe. But yeah, I had to strengthen my feet to do that. So yeah, I understand. I'll tell you what I don't approve of, and that is compression socks. I mean, why would you compress blood vessels that are already having trouble? Makes no sense. But that's people can do what they want to do, I guess. But I strongly advise against compression socks for PAD.
Well, it is contraindicated for most people with PAD, but some people have peripheral vascular disease. They do have some vein flaps that are struggling, and the insurance companies still require 3 months of compression socks, even with PAD at just a lower compression, before they'll actually allow them to perform a procedure to close up any of the troublesome veins. My dad actually had to wait almost a year before he got approval to finally get his troublesome veins actually super glued. So he got the first one super glued just last week, and he's doing better even today. He was able to get his mile. He was able to get to a 30-minute mile, which was really good for him. He used to do 4 miles, including hills, and then he fell, and then he ended up with bilateral blood clots. I think it was in his iliacs. I keep wanting to say common femoral veins, but I'm not quite sure. But anyway, once those were all cleared up, it just seemed like cascading one thing after another. Then his back started having issues. And so he still had trouble walking. We got PRP in his back. Then he got bursitis in his hip. So then he needed a cortisone shot. I mean, it's just one thing after another. But today he was so proud of himself to finally be getting himself, going again. So it's not taking him almost an hour and a half to even make it a mile. So he's slowly progressing. But part of the problem was that they made him just sit there with compression socks. First, they wanted to do compression socks, to half his calf, then his whole calf. And then they had him wearing all the way up to his groin. And it was just nothing seemed to be working. That even made him feel worse. So finally, we were able to get him what he needed, and we're now on. So sometimes it's just the medical system can be a little frustrating and be a little slower than any of us want, and put us through the paces. And,
I think, Kim, the bottom line is every case is different, and everyone has to find their own path through this problem. And so it's, I think the most important thing of all is that people take responsibility for finding out what really works for them.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Kevin, for joining us. If people want to find out more on how to train for aging and how to fight the crippling pain of peripheral artery disease, you can go to Amazon.com, go to Amazon, go to the app, go ahead and look up those books. You can also look up Kevin Morgan, and you'll find all of those books and more. And Kevin, you have a new one in your series. You have a series of books, inspirational self-help books. This is the 4th one, I think, Body Awareness.
I just published the 4th one. And I'm thinking of making the 5th one the last book of a box set before I move on to the 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And so I'm going to create that box set first. and see how well it sells. Because if I can't sell books, I can't reach people. If I can't reach people, I can't help them. So, yeah. So the one I'm writing now is really a very difficult one to write, which is how do you motivate people? How do you motivate them to get up and get going, which is what you do with your work? That, to me, the real problem for people is to get them up and get going and not get depressed and feel beaten down, because this condition is dreadful psychologically.
Absolutely is awful, but you're such an inspiration. Thank you so much. As I said, if you want to learn more books, you can also go to inspirationalselfhelpbooks.com. I love his newsletter. You've got to sign up for his newsletter. He posts so much content and shares all of his experiences, all of his learnings as he goes. But always remember, again, the advice of views are that of Kevin, and you always need to make sure that you check with your own doctor for explicit consent before following any advice or information here. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Kevin, for your time and for providing us some really amazing information that should help us all get out and start walking more effectively.
My pleasure. Thank you, Kim.